we can begin. What do you think?
course.
It's okay? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, let's go. So, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today as one of the authors of Semiotics of Images, Analysis of Pictorial Texts, and as the organizer of this event on behalf of the board of the International Association for Visual Semiotics, Association Internationale de Sémiotique Visuelle. First of all, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to our discussants, Nakassis and Tiziana Migliore, for accepting our invitation with enthusiasm and deep scientific engagement. I also want to acknowledge Paul Cobley, who is not only one of the directors of the book series Semiotics, Communication and Cognition in collaboration with Kalevi-Kuhl, but also the driving force behind this debate. Last but not least, I'd like to express my gratitude to Karin and Alexandros, who played a foundational role in the creation of this book. They not only had the initial idea, but also served as cheville ouvrière. We can translate with the work impetus of the project, meaning they undertook the crucial task of bringing our papers and theories into close relation and dialogue with one another. First of all, this book aims to introduce Greimasian theory to the English-speaking community. We all recognize that to achieve this goal, it is essential to engage in dialogue with other theories that are well known in the Anglophone world. Only through this exchange can Greimas and post-Greimasian semiotic theory be effectively presented to an international audience. Karin and Alexandros accomplished exactly that. They ensured that our ideas as authors of this book entered into conversation with other theoretical approaches to images, including those of Gillian Rose, Bohm, Mitchell, and Peirce, among others. In this sense, our perspective has been framed thanks to other voices that resonate better and widely than semiotics, and that can be a reference to distinguish semiotics in the field of human and social sciences. It is also important to recall that these scholars, such Mitchell and Bohm, but also Peirce himself, have not been extensively referenced in the French-speaking semiotics community. I see some exceptions as the work of Jean-François Bourdron, that he is here today, and the book Jacques and I co-authored this book in 2012 on scientific discourse and meaning and reasoning, And it was crucial for our Romance language tradition to engage with scholars capable of discussing Greimasian semiotics in relation to other traditions such as Karin and Alexandros. For me, one of the great strengths of this book and of structuralist and post-structuralist theory in general is its ambition for analytical rigor, even though I sometimes find myself critically reassessing my mentors, such as Jean-Marie Floch. In particular, Floch and others developed a theory of images in the 80s without fully considering the substance of the plane of expression that is crucial. This is why I have been advocating for a material turn in visual semiotics for at least the past 10 years, as documented also in my two texts included in this volume. That being said, an important advantage of Greimasian theory is that it avoids any form of political engagement, or at least to the extent that every theoretical perspective inevitably carries some form of political positioning, Greimasian theory does not begin its analysis with a priori conclusion or an ideological lens that might limit the heuristics of observation and interpretation. Crucially, our approach does not place a blinding gaze on neo-capitalism, gender, or minority concerns at the core of its analysis, as a certain number of theories of images do. It could be astonishing that I describe one of the awards of semiotics through a negative rhetoric, but I think that in today's academic landscape, this kind of non-engagement is a rare and valuable scientific stance. And I distinguish, of course, this political homogenizing gaze to the study of images from a situated perspective. This kind of neutrality ensures that our perspective remains fundamentally respectful of images, their language, composition, genealogy, circulation, and objectives. But this question about frame, composition, and visuality, what seems to characterize images according to this book, will be discussed today, and different perspectives will be at stake, also thanks to our distinguished discussants. Now it's time to introduce them. I will begin with Paul Cobley, Emeritus Professor of Middlesex University, London. He's widely recognized for his long-standing contribution to cognitive semiotics, particularly narrative theory from a Persian perspective, as well as his work on media, communication, and the cultural implications of biosemiotics. I have the book in my hands. He will take the floor after me, offering a general overview of the book as the director of the book series, and a precious friend and colleague. I also recall that he served as president of the International Association for Semiotic Studies for 10 years. Constantine Nakassis is a professor of linguistic anthropology at the University of Chicago. He's a specialist in Persian theory. He collaborated extensively with Michael Silverstein and other anthropologists discussing and using semiotics. Beyond this, he is an original and influential theorist of cinema, particularly Tamil cinema and Indian politics, and a precious colleague in semiotics. His most recent book here, you can see on screen, which is a seminal work on film theory and reciprocal relationship between cinematic texts and political domain. Costas also leads an important initiative with Tatsuma Padoan, an annual seminar and a series of publications fostering dialogue between Persian theory, linguistic anthropology, and Greimasian semiotics. He is also co-editor-in-chief of the important journal Semiotic Review. Tiziana Migliore is a professor at the University of Urbino, Italy, and one of the most active scholars in visual semiotics, and notably on the grammar of images. I recall her work on Joan Miró and the alphabet. She has authored several books. Most recently, La parola trasformatrice, struttura, enunciazione, intersoggettività. She also serves as Secretary General of the International Association for Semiotic Studies and as Vice President for Italy at the International Association for Visual Semiotics. I will be brief about the authors because we are gathered here today to honorate one of their books. Alexandros Lagopoulos is Professor Emeritus of Urban Planning at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He is an engineer, urbanist, and he also studied in Sorbonne University as a social anthropologist. He has authored numerous books and articles in Greek, English, French, German, Russian, and Bulgarian. However, I will only mention the book he co-wrote recently with Karin Boklund-Lagopoulos, published in the same book series than Semiotics of Images, that is Theory and Methodology of Semiotics, the Tradition of Ferdinand de Saussure. Karin Boklund-Lagopoulos is also Professor Emeritus at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and a historian of medieval literature and literary theory. Her publications include a monograph on medieval English lyrics, published in 2002, and several essays on popular culture. She's also a semiotician of images, as evidenced by her numerous works focusing on painting and cinema. I will not introduce myself, but I will briefly mention Jacques Fontanille. He is currently president of the International Association for Semiotics and is widely recognized for his long career in semiotic theory, visual semiotics, and cultural semiotics. Maria Katsaridou did her PhD studies at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki on the semiotics analysis of animation films. She's a postdoctoral researcher now in the Department of Audio and Visual Arts of the Ionian University of Corfu, where she teaches courses on visual narration, interactive narratives, and interactive art. Walldén is a film theorist and filmmaker and assistant professor of film direction in the Department of Digital Arts and Cinema of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens. Her research interests include film and media theory with a focus on avant-garde and experimental cinema, feminism, and film education. Thanks for your attention, and I give the floor to Paul.
Thank you very much. What I think I'll do, Maria Giulia, I will give a little bit of an introduction to this volume, not very long, and then I have three quite general questions, multi-part questions, but three questions that I will just throw out to the authors so that they can give a little bit of an introduction as well. But for my part, and for Calavies as well, Calavies is on this call. This series in which the book appears, we set it up in 2007. The series is called Semiotics, Communication and Cognition, and it carried on a tradition of a partnership between Mouton de Gruyter and the International Association for Semiotic Studies. So in a way, it's kind of the flagship series for semiotics, or particularly semiotics as it's organized. And Calavi and I, from the start, were committed to a kind of ecumenical approach to semiotics. Whether we'd taken on this series or not. And as you can see, there's a varied range of books among the approaching 40 volumes that we've published. We've got different perspectives, Persian perspectives, work on Eco, Sebiok, Lotman and Tartu semiotics, existential semiotics, and so on. And we also had an initiative with the International Association to try to address issues of gaps in knowledge that were created by works not appearing in different languages, in particular in English, obviously. So a lot of the leading work in Greimasian perspectives on semiotics, they just weren't available to English speakers and to those people who were polyglot but not necessarily writing or competent in French and Italian. So we had a commitment to institute those translations. Also some contribution on the part of de Gruyter and on the part of the International Association in terms of finance. And we already published volume 33 on the corposphere by Finol, and volume 31, Introduction to the Semiotics of the Text by Moroni. We have in preparation Group Muse volume from 2016 in French, I think it was, the Principia. And this volume that we're talking about today, Semiotics of Images, which is not part of that initiative. It's an independent volume in that respect. I think is volume 37 in this series. Now, already we had, as Maria Giulia just mentioned, Theory and Methodology of Semiotics by Alexandros and Karin, which was volume 28 in this series. Okay, so that tradition, which was then continued by the translation initiative, had already been started. In fact, look at the subtitle of that volume, The Tradition of Ferdinand de Saussure. Okay, which is important. In a book series of this kind, it's not an option to be ecumenical. You have to be wide ranging by default. It's absolutely necessary to do that. And we felt that there was a gap for work from this particular perspective. A lot of our volumes had been produced by colleagues, not all of them, but colleagues initially who we had close relationships with, and with Karin and Alexandros. I think for Calvi and I, our friendship with them is now in its third decade, which, you know, is a testimony to just how old we all are now. But the thing about this volume, which I think is absolutely striking, and this is why I want to open it up and have a few introductory questions on it, is the group authorship. I'm really impressed by that. I'm very interested to see how it works, because it bears upon not just this volume, but also our endeavour as an international community of semioticians. We tried to set up something similar in the International Association, to have special interest groups whose goal was to produce, even from different perspectives, a single authored volume. And it was difficult. We haven't produced one yet, even though that initiative has been in place for quite a few years. So it's not been possible. And my first question, therefore, possibly to Karin and Alexandros, because I know that you took an administrative lead in this volume. My first question is, what would you say in a few words was the aim of the volume overall? And then how did you manage the group authorship? And I mean manage in the sense of the double English sense of how did you actually cope? How did you not have a nervous breakdown? And also, how did you act as managers, if that was the case? Because I'm still not completely sure. I know that you pulled it off, but I'm not sure what the day-to-day activity was. And then just a little question that's associated with that. The sections or the chapters are authored. The single author names do appear there. Would you have been happy for them to have been anonymous?
So is that a question that you want us to answer now?
All three, please, if possible. But I can understand some prevarication on one or two of them.
I think that I leave the aim of the book to Alexandros. We can argue about that. But how do you manage a group authorship? Well, first of all, you have to be friends, I think. But apart from that, it's a very practical thing, actually. You exchange a lot of emails, you make telephone calls, you make sure that everybody reads everybody else's work. And you argue a great deal. We've had, for the chapters that are signed by me and Alexandros. We have argued our way through every single page of those chapters, usually at breakfast, but not necessarily. But there have been some very, very interesting discussions, which you see in the book only the result of them. But it's been very interesting for us too, and very fascinating to follow actually, because we did have within the same, what you might call theoretical umbrella, we had quite different perspectives, and we were working on in different directions and doing different things. So I would guess that on the whole, the result, the book, is maybe 1/10 of all the discussion that went on, which I hope we have a chance to continue sometime in the future. Okay, Alexander,
yes, if I can add something. First, the thanks go to you and Katsaridou, because you had the courage to adopt a proposal which seemed utopian. I mean, it's so ambitious that I wonder how you said yes. And we thank you very much. Because you know that we tried to bring together under one theoretical framework the Greimasian and post-Greimasian theory, 4 different directions. The static image, as we call it, painting and photography and advertisement, on the one hand. On the other hand, the 3 branches of the dynamic images, as we call them, that is mainstream cinema, animation, and digital games. And you have to deal with 4 different areas of semiotics with a different historical development, non-communicating between them. That is repeating the non-communication between Persians and Saussureans, and with different theories, not only in comparison, but also inside each theory. So it was very ambitious, and this is why we owe you so many thanks, as also for the rich Anglo-American diploma you proposed to us, and that we integrate, because it was very important for us. We had our field, and we think that it's the best field, manifestly. Okay. This is current. But it was very useful to compare it and criticize it, and criticize other directions. Maybe someone could not agree, but this is not so important as the fact that we came out from a provincial point of view. And this was, in a great degree, offered because of you. On the other hand, also, you gave us very, very interesting, important, and operational guidelines for the formal unit, beyond the essential part, which we can talk about. The formal part, how the book can give an impression of unity on the formal level. Now, as to the essential level, it is what Karin said. We worked like a group. We liked each other, and now we like even more each other, because we were in a very, very close contact, as Karin said, in continuous exchanges, discussions, disagreements, and we worked on disagreements very systematically. And I think, and I hope the other co-authors can testify on that fact, because I believe that is a fact, that we arrived to this book at a consensus. This is not general. Outside the book, we may have very different theoretical views on certain points, but I think that the book was the product of a common consensus. This is my feeling, at least. The other authors can testify on it. I don't know if we gave you a first feeling.
And yes, but we have also not answered one question. You asked us about the fact that the chapters are by individual authors.
Yes.
And in fact, you asked us about that while we were still in the process of writing it. And that, it seemed to us, was a kind of red line. We had to allow everyone to have their own say, their own position, and in a sense, their own authority. I don't think that in the end it turned out to be a disadvantage. I think, first of all, it's a matter of academic ethics, if you like, but apart from that, I think there is some advantage to this, precisely because everyone brings their own contribution to this thing. So, on the whole, I believe that was the correct decision.
Of course, let me add that formally, as I was saying before, I agree with you. I mean, the fact of the different names loosens the formal unity of the group. So, as an experienced editor, you know that what we are saying, and we understood very well your point of view, but it was a kind of cost-benefit. Someone maybe could have done in a different way, but as Karin said, it is the kind of cost-benefit we decided.
Good. Well, I mean, it's a good thing that we're having this event, because if the author names reify the contributions, then this event, I think, is untangling them. But I have one question. I won't say much about it because I think Kostas is going to unpack a little bit of this or ask about it. But I mean, briefly, given that you have a fair survey of other approaches within semiotics, and in addition, you say, and I think we would all accept that that there's no one unified Greimasian perspective. Why in the end do you favour the Greimasian perspective in this volume? Just for practical purposes.
Okay, well, I can start with that anyway. I think mostly it's because we needed a common framework that we could agree on. There are lots of theoretical approaches to images, and some of them, some of them are extremely interesting, but it's a little bit a matter of perspective, or even as a matter of goal, you might say, that one of the purposes that we started out with when we began this project was that we needed to set our own house in order, in a sense, bring some coherence to what had become many different voices within the Franco-Italian Greimasian tradition. And the job then of looking at other perspectives was for us rather secondary to begin with. It became very interesting as we went along, but it was rather secondary to begin with. And it simply, I think, to try to integrate all of that at the same time. Maybe somebody can do a better job of that in the future, but for us it was just too much.
And just to add some, I think I'm not speaking about the best here. I just thinking that the Greimasian approach is sophisticated and mature. So we had one approach with which we could work, and we had very good people to work with. So this was the empirical, practical part. On the other hand, as you know, we came into contact with the other tools. We criticized it from our point, I think to the point where one can agree or disagree. But they were useful. I mean, for me, I believe in epistemological clarity. I don't mix two different paradigms, because even a small term of one paradigm is loaded with the basic principles. And if the basic principles collide, personally, I feel mad. So I want things to belong to a coherent paradigm. But on a lower level, the objects with which the other theories were working were very useful, and they enriched our point of view. You see, even if we had, or I had, a theoretical disagreement, I had a material which oriented me to search something which I couldn't search if I didn't have the rival theory. I don't know if it's clear what I have in mind.
Thank you. I'm certain that others will chip in later, but that is very useful. It's paradigmatic of a certain kind of successful academic collaboration. So before I introduce the talks from the next two speakers, I just wanted you to set the scene, if possible. I mean, any of the authors, but Karin and Alexandros, feel free to jump in on this. And it's two related questions, I suppose. What is the visual? What are we talking about here? Are we on the same page? I know it's not an easy one, but to supplement that, and perhaps make it approachable. All non-verbal communication is visual, as is a great deal of verbal communication, for example, writing. And in fact, at the end of this volume, you have a excellent contribution rounding it off on script. So I suppose the question that I'm asking, put in another way, is how is it possible to get away from a pre-constituted field? For example, in Anglophone academia, you have something called visual culture, and that's a very delimited field. It's certainly not the semiotics of images. It's much more limited than that. So how do you do that?
Yes. Okay, we can come back. Maybe some of the other authors would like to intervene, and at the end we can say a bit. Jacques, I guess we are.
I would only like to say that I think that we need to think otherwise, differently than we have already thought this differentiation of languages, so semiotics, writings, and so on. I think that it's an important intellectual exercise. I try to do a sort of this exercise more and more often, because I understand that the pre-constituted plan of expressions are problematic. Personally, I tried to do something in this direction with diagrams and scientific discourse. I spoke about it with Karin and Alexandros when we were writing together, in a sense, when we were reading each other. At the same time, I understand the necessity as well to consider the specificity of each language, because for us, for we can say the visualist, people that are trained in art history and so on, it's very important to demonstrate, first of all, that image can reflect, make philosophy, can embody theories, and so on. So obviously, we tried to demonstrate that visual language is autonomous. This was the first step. Autonomous in the sense, not in the sense criticized in the introduction, but in the sense that image can speak about itself and can speak about other images. So this was historically, it was our first concern. It's only after that we understand, we see that in many cases, especially in the case of discourse, scientific discourse, where image is done by equation, is a simulation of mental experiences and so on. So there we understood that the relevancies were more distributed than within the frames of an image or of an equation. So we understood the necessity. I speak at the plural because I think that the scientific project we had with Jacques Fontanille, Jean-François Bourdron, and Anne Bayard and other people in France helped us to understand that it was important to work on a distributed iconicity, that it was not only verbal but imaginative or mathematical calculation and so on. It's obviously something different from our training and our, so it's obvious that in other fields, like in artistic fields, for me, it's more difficult to go beyond the frame, go beyond the sacrality of the painting compositions, for instance. But I think that the problem here, the problem that you speak about, it's that we began, the visual semiotics began with the study of artwork. So we had to focus on some density, density that is typical of artwork. Thanks.
When I said briefly, I should have acknowledged that it was absolutely impossible to be brief. Rhea.
Do excuse me, I had the microphone off. I wanted a few additions to what Maria just, because I'm also coming from cinema, where the question of specificity was, and not reducibility of image to words was quite central to the history of the medium. So I would go a step back and ask why Grimace? If not particularly Grimace, what I find interesting is the epistemological choice of Saussurean tradition, which stresses the conventionality of the semiosis, and this extends to image. I think that is a very useful and productive tool to address the fact that the images that we are talking about are precisely not just perceptions, but constructed artifacts. So this discussion starts from that point, which addresses not only images that are produced by art, but all the images that we read, we interpret from our computers, for example. So my interest in this project has to do with this initial decision that we are remembering the constructed nature of what we are discussing and the complication of the relation to the reference. So why we discuss, so not all nonverbal systems are visual, by the way, and certainly what the kind of visual choice, visual objects, I mean objects in the sense of the general sense, not touched. The kind of visual product that interests us is the one that it is codified, constructed socially and codified. And into that question, I'm very much interested also in my research in the, how we say, to question the categorical distinctions between the different materialities and substances. But I think that it is a good point of departure, particularly Jemsliev in my case, the conceptualization of the substance of expression and the expression plane in a way that distinguishes the different levels of this formation, social formation, as an articulation to what is outside. So this is a very useful tool in order to proceed in questioning the categories. And I have a feeling that it is very crucial now, because exactly we are using images in the sense that this book discusses more than ever. We are using them now in a very well-directed way in this platform. And it is an ability to read, and the Greimasian methodology gives us a productive way to read this kind of images. So the ability to read these images should not be dissolved between the general media competence and let's say, critical thought. The fact that there are linguistic, semiotic ways to read images which are particular to this kind of images, composition, and all the issues of the discussion of the form of image. So this would be my small intervention, addition to what Maria said.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me,
yes,
Chairman, if I may, I think that something was implied in your question, which should be discussed. For a very, very high and abstract level of discussion, we could say, for instance, that we have acoustic images. So we could pass to another kind of perception, which is not the eye, but the ear. I think that we should not discuss on that level, because this is a matter. And anyway, this goes to biology and psychology, because it is there where they differentiate between the different, among the different senses. So we are not speaking about this matter. We are there on the level of the eye. The eye can see, or the eye can be simulated. A description of a forest in a book is a simulation of the eye. So this could be, in my view, considered as belonging to the analysis of images in a wide sense. No, more specific, we have the domain of images, optical, but we see. Okay, we stay there. And in this domain, I think that there are different points of view according to a Saussurean, Jemslevian approach or a personal. I don't want to enter into the subject. We discuss it in our one of our chapters in the beginning. This is a long discussion. The better thing is for someone to read the book and then have objections or agree with the writing or both.
Can I add something very quickly? The question of visuality as such, the mechanics of seeing or everything that is visual. First of all, there are lots of people who are working on that already. It's you might even say fashionable. And also, it's for me at least, it seems to be much too wide and much too ambitious. Partly because what interests us, I think, from the beginning was the mechanisms that produce meaning in visual images, and that is a more limited question, a more limited issue. So, for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Thanks indeed, everyone. I think now I've taken too much chair's privilege. I think I'm going to introduce Kostas first, and then Tiziana afterwards. Kostas, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me here today. I want to thank the authors in particular, and Maria Giulia, for giving me the opportunity to give some thoughts on this remarkable volume, and also as part of this quite important book series, which is incredibly impressive. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the book, I encourage you to read it. And if you're teaching, I encourage you to teach it to your students. I should say at the start, as Maria Giulia mentioned, that I'm not a semiotician in the Greimasian tradition. I'm a linguistic anthropologist and trained in a form of semiotics that emerges from the intersection of a number of different traditions that do not overlap very much with the Greimasian tradition, namely American pragmatism and the semiotics of Charles Sanders Peirce, the Boasian legacy of Americanist anthropology and linguistics, and the linguistics and semiotics that come down from Roman Jakobson after he moved to the United States, as filtered through his many heirs in American linguistic anthropology, from Del Hymes to Paul Friedrich to Michael Silverstein, among others. And as Maria Giulia did also mention, my work does, however, focus on images, ethnographic field research in the South Indian film industry of Tamil Nadu. And that background conditions part of what I want to say today. It also made reading this book a great exploration into territories partly unknown, which is to say I learned an incredible amount from reading the book. And again, thanks to Paul for this initiative that has brought this book to a wider, and this approach to images to a wider audience. I'd also like to say congratulations to the authors. It's an incredibly ambitious and wide-reaching volume that demonstrates the power of a certain way of doing semiotics, in particular for theorizing, analyzing, and interpreting visual images. So again, I recommend that you read the book and see for yourself. You won't be disappointed in the range and the depth of analysis and creative thinking. So the book is a tour de force of semiotics, and I think that's the first thing that I think we should recognize. In the rest of my comments, I want to probe a little bit as what I see as the borders of this larger project. Some of these borders are internal and others face outwards, and I hope these will be opportunities for the authors to articulate further the project of the book, which they've already begun to do. So let me begin with the title of the book, The Semiotics of Images, and in relationship to its subtitle, The Analysis of Pictorial Texts. So here emerge a set of poetic contrasts, maybe not exactly a semi-symbolism, but the suggestion of it through the emergence of a possible isotopy. On the one hand, we have semiotics and analysis equated and perhaps differentiated. And on the other hand, we have images and pictorial texts. So the title is a little thumbnail sketch of the book. In fact, an assertion of its claim, namely, that this kind of semiotics has something to do with analysis, and what it can analyze, or what promises to analyze in the book, are images, which are equated and perhaps also differentiated from pictorial texts. Now, on the assumption that these equations are not synonyms, since if they were, denotationally at least, we'd have a title that just repeated itself twice, like an image refracted across the mirror glass of the colon that separates them. But assuming that they're not exactly synonyms, and that's why it needed to be repeated in some form, the first question is, what's the difference between these terms? Further note that the section titles of the book frame what is to follow as a theory of images, so the first part of the book, to then be followed by the interpretation of particular images, the second and the third part of the book. So in short, then, we have two series. On the one hand, semiotics, theory, analysis, interpretation, and then we have another series, image, pictorial text. So again, what are the differences that are modulated across these different terms? Is semiotics a theory of interpretation? Is it a way of doing an analysis of texts? Are those the same thing? Further, what kinds of texts are images? Are they only pictorial, as Paul raised just a second ago? And are pictorial texts and images the same thing? If so, why repeat oneself? So this is a question for all of the panelists, all of the authors, but perhaps best directed to Professors Lagopoulos and Boklund-Lagopoulou as the authors of the book's theory-setting opening chapters. So this leads to a second set of questions already anticipated by Paul regarding this relationship of modality, here this question of visibility and the visual, and semiotic ground in the Peircean sense. So this is the question of iconicity, again in Peirce's sense. And this second series of comments and questions could be for any of the authors, but are directed in particular to Professors Fontanille and Dondero. So the question, again, to tread over some ground that Paul already introduced, is the seemingly obvious but also quite vexing question, not of what is the visual, but what is an image? More specifically, and here touching on Paul's provocation, are pictorial texts visual texts? Are there non-visual images? And I think Professor Lagopoulos already began to speak about this a little bit. Jacobson talked about figures and sound, for example, quoting Hopkins. Are there proprioceptive or tactile images? Of course, there are many people who can't see, for example. So the question is, do they have images? Here, the question isn't the one raised in chapter 5, that the visual is a multicodal discourse, but rather whether visibility is itself sufficient to delimit the scope of images. Now, if it is not, then images are not reducible to medium or modality. They involve a more abstract semiotic relation or process that's partly independent of plastic features as such, nor are they necessarily reducible to figurative relations, as the chapters by Fontanille and Dondero point out importantly. We might say instead that images are diagrammatic textures made of relations between plastic features that invite a possible figuration or of something or other. So it's a kind of metaplasticity, you might say, in anticipation of a possible figurativity. And here, Professor Fontanille's chapter 4 is particularly interesting and exciting on this point, and I direct you to look at that chapter on some of these very interesting issues. Now here, though, we reach a more complex impasse, because if we give up on delimiting the class of images, and therefore the semiotics of images, if we give up on the prototypy and stereotypy of our folk category image, paintings, drawings, photographs, cinema, and if instead we embrace a more encompassing notion of image, we end up with a rather unruly analytic category. Does the category of image have any more boundaries, for example? And is this a problem? My suggestion is that it's not a problem. I would propose that we should not actually aim to have a category images that would separate itself out from other analytic categories like language or music, as does W.J.T. Mitchell, for example, but instead think of the image as a dimension of semiosis. And this, in effect, is a kind of a channeling of the way in which Peirce tends to think, for whom Peirce, for example, thinks of all of his trichotomies, icon, index, symbol, rime, dicent, argument, tone, token, type, not as types of signs, but as dimensions of sign processes. Now, if we make this move, what becomes of the semiotics of images? Or put otherwise, how can an analysis of prototypical images be generalized to a much wider landscape of semiosis? And how can the particularities of the former, the analysis of photos, paintings, films, drawings, help us theorize the latter, the image in semiosis tout court? So in short, it seems to me that we need a much more radical deconstruction of the question of image versus non-image. For example, image versus language, as Professor Walldén was saying, a very common distinction that you find in visual studies and film studies. Partly, I think we need a much more radical deconstruction of these kinds of oppositions, because I'm not actually convinced that we as yet have a really full understanding of what an image is, or even what language is for that matter. Rather, we often assume we know, and then we look for the differences from which we equally assume are not images. And instead of that, we might dwell on the fact that these are rather unsettled objects of analysis. Now, here emerge two more linked questions. One is, where's the end of semiotics in this project? Not just what are the boundaries of the image, but what are the boundaries of semiotics itself as a discipline? And relatedly, what are its ends? That is, what are its goals? Let me pose the first question, and then I'll turn to the second one. So what's the status of the word extra in the phrase that threads throughout the book, in the phrase extra semiotic? Now, as semioticians, we often begin with the Saussurean claim that a true science of meaning, in Saussure's case of language, needs to take a theoretical perspective on its object first because its object is not pre-given to it. And to do this requires a certain kind of epistemic violence or excision that purifies its object of analysis in order to analyze it, to separate what it wants to analyze from the noise that surrounds it. So one question is, do we have to do so? And we take this as a given that this is the departure point. A related question is, do we actually end up doing so in practice? Let's say we say that we do so, but do we really? Now here, again, the equation of image with text makes me wonder about the semiotic status of everything before, around, and after the text. Its so-called context, the encompassing image within which the image under analysis is embedded, and which the image under analysis thus refracts, but also acts in. Does an image's boundaries end at the frame which frames it, with the frame that invites us to see it as an image? Or is this the lure of the image, like the commodity fetish that belies exchange, the religious symbol that obscures the social, as in Durkheim's reflections in the elementary forms of religion, or the focus on the word that obscures the mediation of grammar, as Saussure, Boas, Sapir, and Worf all argued? These are traps which blinker our theoretical vision. They ask us to go deeper inside the image rather than to go beyond it to discover where it otherwise dwells. And trapped by this partial object, does our theoretical vision thus dictate a partial methodology, namely analysis or interpretation of the image? Now here I wonder about other methods and other sites for analysis, and I'd like to gesture to openings in the book that point this way. Professor Fontanille's signal discussion of the inscription and becoming of the image as a semiotic process itself that we are beholden to study. Professor Dondero's insightful discussion of big data and digitalization that requires us to move beyond the image to the database and the algorithm. Professor Walldén's rich historical discussion of avant-garde film, and Professor Katsaridou's considerations of the process of script creation, which is the final chapter of the volume, as a practical problem that comes before the image by virtually imagining it and then textualizing it. But one question is, do we yet have a semiotics that can allow these other sites, these other processes to fully come to the fore as focal objects of analysis rather than something extra that we add on to our semiotics? Might other methods also furnish other ways of doing semiotics? And would we still accept this as the semiotics of the image? And if not, why not? Or is semiotics necessarily focused on the text and its immanence, something that's always appended to other approaches, given over to other disciplines? Given the strong historical quality of Professor Walldén's discussion of the avant-garde and the autoethnographic accounts of video games provided by Professor Katsaridou, I would love to hear their thoughts on these questions of method and how they mix or otherwise resolve these other kinds of methodologies with semiotic approaches. Now, finally, I have just a much wider metadisciplinary question that the volume provoked in me from reading it. And the question is for all of the authors, or for any who would like to address it. Now, let me briefly return to my own disciplinary background for a moment, linguistic anthropology. This is a field which barely exists outside of North America. I wouldn't be surprised if people on this call have little to no familiarity with what linguistic anthropology means or is. And even within North America, even within anthropology, it's a very small field. It has big ambitions, though. And I fear that as a field, we were overfed on the riches of the so-called linguistic turn, riches that today we consume as scraps from a table now gone. Now, what I mean by this is that in the aftermath of the structuralist and analytic philosophical revolutions of the 20th century, everything was language, and language was at the center of everything. In American academia, at least, this linguistic turn completed its revolution, but spiraled out no more. Instead, in many disciplines, there came to be a rejection of semiotics and linguistic models in particular. And of course, the history of linguistics was a receding back into language rather than an ambitious view beyond it, natural language in that case. As such, semiotics itself receded in importance, no longer the center of attention, no longer the promised metadiscipline that would bring together and explain all problems, no longer the promised metadiscipline and the meta language, that quixotic dream that Umberto Eco taught us about, a universal language for all sciences. We became esoteric, strange, anachronistic, a vestige. Now, I exaggerate somewhat, but not too much, I think. And I wonder and I imagine that similar things have happened in European academia as well. Now, what happens when you are an empire whose authority is no longer recognized by who live in what you would like to claim as your domain? Where do your urges to colonize all other disciplines go to explain all other problems when there are fewer and fewer people listening? In my discipline, sometimes this creates a kind of imperial anxiety, the felt need to defend a canon, a theory, and relatedly to argue that everything anyone else ever discovered in the domains of meaning, society, or culture was already explained by us, that our theory can do it all already. Anxiety finds its zenith at the nadir of curiosity and openness, and on the brink of irrelevance and stuck in eminence. Now, again, I really don't think things are that bad. In fact, the fact that I'm talking to you here today means there's incredible vitality across many types of semiotics, and this book series, of course, is a demonstration of that as well. But the question that I raise here is one about rhetoric and disciplinarity, and it's a question that runs through this book. Where does semiotics fit within the landscape of the humanities and the social sciences? Will art historians read this book? Is it for them? If not, why not? How about film scholars or visual studies scholars? Will Halliday-derived social semioticians or Persian scholars read this book, and is it for them? And if it does it address them? Will they hear its call? Or for that matter, will practitioners of media arts read it? And here I'm thinking again of Professor Katsaridou's wonderful chapter. So ultimately, this is a question of address and openness, but also curiosity and humility. If a sign is an invitation to another, who is being invited to sit at the table and break bread? And can we host them properly? And again, thank you for the opportunity to read the book and offer some comments. I'll hand it back to Paul.
Kostas, thanks very much for that absolutely coruscating intervention. So many bright points, to the extent that, and provocative, I can tell by the smiles on the faces of people, nicely provocative, to the extent that I would like to garner a general response from any of the authors who wants to intervene. A lot to think about there, but if you can respond in general terms, that would be excellent.
I begin if Karin and Alexandros. I don't know.
You begin and we.
No, I wanted to say, I wanted to say something about the proposal to consider to go beyond the image and to consider images as dimensions of semiotics. I think that in post-Greimasian semiotics, this step has been partly done. It's not completely recognized, it's not completely developed. But if I think, for instance, to the work of Fontanille, which differentiates visuality and visibility in some texts, in some text of, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably, we can study the visibility before and after it becomes visual, in a sense. And I come back to the topic of the scientific discourse, but it's not necessary to focus on this discourse. But obviously, the fact that the image can be latent as a research topic before having a visualization, theoretical visualization in a sense, is surely one of the way to think sense or meaning before visualization, in the sense that we can consider before and after image that it exists a plasticity in a sense that constructs a journey from the virtuality to the realization. And I think that modes of existence, as Costas knows very well, can be useful to think image as a dimension of semiosis. Always about the work of Fontanille, I would like to say that that also the idea of forms of life is something that helps to quit with the specificity of every plane of expression, and try to think about the rhythm and the correspondences between different planes of expression. It helps to distribute different forms of plasticity and different forms of density of texture. You spoke about textures of relations. I think it's very important. I will give the floor to the other authors because I spoke already a lot.
It's good though. I think Jacques, you are next.
Yes. First, thank you, Paul and Kalevi, who welcome us into the collection of Direct. And our two conductors, Alexandros and Karin, and Maria Giulia, for the organization of the meeting. And thanks for our first discussion, Costas, for your attentive and critical reading. Concerning images, from our part, I have used the notion of image very little, perhaps not at all. I have not verified, because it is not a concept identified in structural semiotics, except by Jean-François Bourglan, but in an acceptance that is not reserved to what is visual. In my chapter 4, I pointed out the progressive shifts, particularly in Floch, when Greimasian semioticians were busy beginning visual semiotic. First, shift from the semiotic of image to visual semiotics. And secondly, the visual semiotics to planar semiotics. The shifts which seek to neutralize the sensory channel of reception and to substitute for its properties, such as the number of spatial or temporal dimensions, which relate to the practice of production or interpretation, to the modus operandi as it manifests itself in the apparently visible, but fundamentally polysensory object. And in this regard, one of the questions that arises is that of the passage from the visual object, or if you prefer, the picture, to the status of a work of art or an oeuvre. I would like to point out that for me, the text or the textuality corresponds to one level of semiotization, among others. Others, which are mainly that of practices, form of life, and modes of existence. In my two chapters, my effort focuses precisely on the articulation between textual manifestations and practices. To sum up the chapter 4 on the plastic and the iconic dimensions, it consists of gradually moving the problematic from the space of textual inscription towards the aspecto-temporal properties of practice, production, and especially interpretation. If there are two possible similes, iconic and plastic, from the same substances of expression, it is because they can be grasped from two different points of view corresponding to two different interpretative practices. One turned towards the recognition of already memorized figures, and the other turned towards the promises of meaning that are associated with the practical choices of production, which have become forms of plastic expression. It's not only a matter of medium support, etc. It's matter of a type of meanings, an opening towards the great anthropological schemes of practices and the imaginaries associated with them. And regarding the other chapter, the serial analysis of Saabi and Lawrence's works, the series are obviously not images. They are rather objects assembled for exhibitions, but they are not text either, unless if we assume that a large text can function as a multidimensional network of relations made up of similarities and variations. The question I wanted to answer was precisely, if we reconstruct the interpretative work that a spectator must do in front of this series, what is its overall form? In what dimension and mode of existence is it situated? In other words, what are the frameworks of the practice that it must adopt? I was very interested in Descola's anthropological study of modes of figuration. And finally, I understood that this was also the knot that he tries to undo and retie in his own way. How can one articulate an anthropological meaning from practices whose objects produced could at any moment drift towards representation, decorative or informative iconicity, etc. That is to say, escape the insistent questioning of the profound form of human experience. You know that for me, it is far from the problem of image or not image. The articulation bequeaths fundamentally textual semiose and a practical semiose and an existential semiose.
Thank you very much. Rhea, I saw your hand up.
Yes, but I do believe that Karin and Alexandros should speak before me, and then I also have some comments. But because the question was initially started by addressing them.
Karin, Alexandros, did you plan to answer?
At least some of the questions.
Okay.
If you prefer, we'll do it that way. If you don't prefer, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So because there are so many questions, I won't comment on all of them, although they were very provocative. I'll try to answer the ones that were mostly addressed to me. So to have about the question of the extra semiotic, much of, as you see, all the book, but the first of my chapters has a lot to do with the articulation with the extra semiotic. So why do we call it extra is your problem, and why we choose the categories that put this extra as extra. I think that methodologically is very useful, precisely in order to organize the field, to organize what we are discussing. So what are these extras, these articulations to what is outside? Okay, there is the discussion that my previous colleagues said about text and process, and I personally would include the process into a kind of textuality, but I keep that in parentheses. So I find the schema of Jemslev very useful because it differentiates the points where it's possible to have this articulation towards the medium, towards the process of creating the semiotic, anyway, expression, towards the referent, which is a different thing. The kind of approach that Alexandros has done in the past includes several other articulations. The most important of them was the material production. And following to this, let's say, tradition, I kind of classified the possible positions where this interaction happens. So, and you say, but all the outside is not already semioticized. Excuse my English. Yes, of course it is, but by different semiotic systems. And it is important, do excuse the way I speak, it's some time I haven't spoken English. So I find very useful, for example, the fact that very clearly we see through this system that the kind of discussion that in cinema relates to the kind of representing reality is all misplaced, because it is a relation to the production of the film and not a relation to its reference. So it gives us a lot of tools to reposition the questions, not to assume that the categorizations are eternal. So in cinema, yes, it is a multi-modal system, which means, however, that we have to remember that it is, as you all said, it is the form that manifests itself and forms the substance. So we don't really speak about the medium. It is a correct thing to say that it's not really visual. The images are not really visual in a very a very general level of semiosis. What are the elements that allow a material to be the expression substance of the kind of system that we discuss is a question. How many dimensions? So you say about a tactile system. Yes, a tactile system could possibly become the material for the kind of thing that we are discussing. Anyway, I'm trying to say too much into little time. Anyway, to the most, to your question, yes, of course, the context, yes, history, yes, everything, yes, politics, yes, the experience of, and exactly, cinema is a very good example to see how the process of production, for example, is in different places and times. But why do we still need the pertinence of the specific point of view that we choose? We still need it because we have to actually read the traces all these leave to the text, where text has nothing to do with words, by the way, because I have a feeling that in your argument, you make a slight slippage, very, very slight, sometimes working, sometimes not, of this distinction between language and image. In the game that I was invited to play here, images, when I say language, I mean not at all words. I really, really don't mean words. So in my case, the fact that it is a text has nothing to do with words. Anyway, going back to the discussion. So to jump, why we still need it isn't imperialist form. Well, I will say two relevances that I see every day. The one relevance is to read. And so this has nothing to do with our book. Our book, of course, it is a very scholarly thing. But what this book gives us tools to read the images, I use it to teach in the university. I think that it would be very useful to understand the kind of culture that we live in. I teach it even not only the university, in children of primary school. It's a way to understand how meaning is constructed in a world that it is more visual than it used to be in the past. So it's very useful. Also, this discussion of the initial radical arbitrariness, which I love, I completely am in love with, helps very much to understand the conversations regarding the referent, all the political discussion, which has nothing to do with art, but has a lot to do with images of how we create the image of reality. And so it is very political, not in the sense that Maria said of having your ideology in advance, but as a tool to untangle ideology, and very, very practical. And I do believe that it is used both as a tool to untangle ideology and as a tool to weave ideology. So, and for the artists, I teach them exactly to untangle conventionalities. So very, very useful, this system, to show them what they can do beyond what they see already. So that was a bit too, I don't know, passionate. Thank you.
I think we've got Karin and then Jacques. Without being impolite, I hope that I can ask you to be brief, because I want to get Tiziana on before too long. So if you can, I'd be grateful.
I'll try to find this, because Professor Nakassis often so many subjects, we don't have the time to discuss them, unfortunately. From Long, for instance, which he gave an image of reification. I think that this is not true. I don't want to stay on that matter, because it was an epistemological decision from a chaos of linguistic data. What will be the breakthrough to study language? And he said the linguistic system. Okay, so I think that it's a very important epistemological decision, which is not the time to discuss. But what I wanted to add to the previous discussion is that we have a great convergence of views, probably with another terminology. Professor Nakassis very rightly put the problem of the relation between the formal level and the processual level, right? And at least personally, I believe that the one cannot work without the other, because the processual level opens a dimension behind or before the form. And on the other hand, if you don't have the form, you don't know about what to speak. So we have thinking now or a little bit of Anglo-Saxon terminology. You have the text and the situation. So we are speaking about the situation, and Jacques is exactly analyzing the situation with his levels of substance, from the modes, the V to the flux, etc. So we are trying epistemologically to do the same thing, articulation of the text with situation. Now, text. What I believe is situation, and in linguistics it is not any mega system. It is a situation of a party, the situation of etc. To remind of a holiday, etc. They are what I would call micro situations. But I believe that we refer also to a macro situation. In his book with Tueñas, Jacques speaks about capitalism. This is not a micro situation. It's not a situation where speech acts evolve and the one answer is the macro. The problem then is, and I don't think that it was studied systematically, there is no articulation between the macro and the micro. And if there is, how can we study? Now, I come to the crucial point. We are speaking about ecstasy. This extra semiotic could be approached by another kind of paradigm as semiotic, which is semantizing sociology. It's not impossible. So let us forget the difference between the Semiotic sociology and the material sociology in which we believe, and let us agree on this need for a macro situation with which to articulate the micro situation. I hope that maybe this can help to bring together different views we discussed. Sorry for that.
Thank you. No, that's good. Karin, very briefly.
Yes. Professor Nakassis started asking, is semiotics a kind of interpretation? It is a kind of interpretation, a theory of one kind of interpretation, roughly how meaning-making systems work. Now, that theory leads to a certain kind of methodology, and here I'm going to return to what Giulia was saying. An analysis which tends to be largely, but not exclusively, intrinsic analysis, textual. But it does always need to include socio-historical context and situation. As I think you quoted somewhere, an image is always an image for someone. Absolutely. This book does not focus on that. It focuses on the intrinsic mechanisms. Not only, but the intrinsic mechanisms persist. The traces exist. The mechanism in the text exists, the coherence-making mechanisms. And presumably they are part of what makes the image mean something, or what makes the text mean something for that someone who makes it and for the someone who makes the meaning out of it. If they share the same cultural context, at least, I don't quite know what I do know to some extent, what happens to a text when it is encountered by somebody who does not share that cultural context. Now, what I would like to do with the methodology that I have is not to tell the spectator what to see. What I'm trying to do is to figure out what the spectator does see, how the spectator sees it. But I'm focusing on the mechanism, on the text, and not on the spectator. It is impossible to separate the text or the utterance from its situation. But there is a difference of focus, I think. It's a difference of focus, not a difference of perspective so much, but we cannot understand any text without seeing it in socio-historical context. But the question is, do I focus on the situation, or do I focus on the mechanisms intrinsic to the text which are used in that situation? I don't know if it's possible to focus on both at the same time. We only have one lifetime. But we're doing our best. We cannot completely rely on an articulation with other disciplines, because we have to know something about those other disciplines. We have to do a little bit of homework and take some responsibility for how the connection is made. But that, maybe I should say that that's for the next book. Wasn't the focus of this.
Paul, don't kill me. Give me 2 minutes because I will explode. Can you give me 2 minutes?
You'll kill him. Jacques is going to kill
You
you.
only have the one lifetime. I think somebody wise said that. But yes,
I'm not so wise. I'll be very because Professor Nakassis made a very interesting semiolinguistic observation. Speaking about the terms, you remember, explanation and analysis, interpretation and analysis. He was working on these terms. Just very quickly, in the common language, interpretation is explanation. Analysis, I would say that's something more detailed explanation. Of course, in the different traditions, you can find different terms. For analysis, the Marxist Lucien Goldman uses compréhension. And for the articulation with material society, explication. So I'm not speaking about the different traditions, but about these two terms. You are right. We are not very consistent. They are used empirically and with some, margins like the gypsy violin. Okay, thank you.
Jacques,
Yes,
briefly.
I will obey you, Paul. I will add something about extra semiotic in 2 sentences. First sentence, I think that what is extra semiotic is something that is not yet semiotic and is waiting to be semioticized. Second, it is not, to answer to Costa, it is not imperialism. It is a diplomatic process. 2 sentences, no more.
That's excellent. That's extremely good practice. I would like to bring in Tiziana now because she's been waiting patiently. And what I propose that we do is we have some responses to Tiziana as well, but then we give the final words, brief words towards the end to the discussants. And that they will leave us to go away and contemplate. So Tiziana, would you like to take the floor now?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much, Maria Giulia, for involving me in this presentation, and all the contributors for this book that is a great surprise for me. Me too, I want to congratulate the authors for the wonderful work, theoretical accounts and in-depth analysis. Firstly, your introduction really impressed me because of the clear position that you take what you consider the most, I quote, the most appropriate approach to the vast universe of images from the point of view of their signification. Here, it is not a question of principle or school affiliation. Rather, you examine, you compare and show different theories, Michel Foucault's epistemology, psychanalysis, visual studies with the iconic turn and the pictorial turn by Böhm and Mitchell, Persian visual semiotics by Tony Geppi in the first chapter, and the comparison allows us to infer that I quote, the French school of semiotics of the Saussurean, Jemslevian, Greimasian tradition is the strongest, best developed theory we have for the study of signification, including the signification of images. Good. One, however, might wonder why. Paul just did it. Paul asked why. The fact that other approaches are not satisfactory doesn't mean that Greimasian is. Actually, you provide much evidence for the effectiveness of this paradigm, but especially regarding images, its great force lies, according to me, in the concept of reciprocal presupposition between the plan of expression and the plan of content. In Greimasian semiotics, unlike other approaches, if there is a syntactic, there is also a semantic, and vice versa, like in a sheet of paper. A perceptive form of the natural world in front of me is, first of all, something that is already charged with the meaning that it culturally has. And it generates new signification in the experience, in the situation, in the practice of encountering me. The coupling form of expression, form of content is a distinctive category of the Greimasian approach and has a great strength for the study of images. But precisely, meanings and signification already in Saussure and Jemslev, later in Greimas, are thought in relationship to values and valences. The challenge posed by Jemslev's structural semantics was to study the collective appreciations through the study of the form of sign. Greimas conceived semiotics as an, I quote, axiological adventure, which implies the search for values. That is how things matter to people and to individuals, and if they are conjuncted or disjuncted with them. So, for instance, I try to share an image. I don't know if I can do it. I try. So,
I think you will be able, you know, because I chose
Yes.
the option everybody can.
Here, the smooth sides of the ordinary daily village life in the census at Bethlehem by Peter Bruegel, well analyzed by Karin in the book, the miniature of the holy couple of Joseph and Mary in the lower right corner of the painting means of the plan of expression because it marks the exercise of a political power that is presented not from the point of view of the ruling class, but from the perspective of the governed. Conjunction with the social values, disjunction from the political and economic ones that would have required exceptional dimensions, both of the holy couple and the painting. So, size is a new category for the analysis of figurative and plastic language, but in general, what I learned from the Greimasian and from Paolo Fabri's studies about the signification of images is the nexus between meanings and values. The semi-symbolic correlation small-big, as on the plan of content, poor, rich, but also humility, ordinary life versus pomposity and exceptional event, is not a mechanical formula, rather a synthesis of systems of values. The semi-symbolic model, after the assumption that forms are the result of inscriptions of forces, Maria Giulia says this, and this is René Thom insisted on this. It's true. After the investigation of the iconoplastic rhetoric of the tensions between the iconic language and the plastic one, Fontanille, Jacques wrote about it. After the study of isotopies, Karin should complete, the semi-symbolic model should complete any analysis, also in order to avoid that semiotics, I quote Karin and Alexander, splits into two different approaches, one concerning depiction and connotation, and the other concerning syntax. Depiction, connotation, and syntax, to continue their discourse, are all factors of one and the same semiotic system. A semiotic theory of the image must be one and unified. But it will be one and unified insofar as it will be adherent to the mode of being of the text and practices that we analyze and that are fabricated by humans together with non-humans, artificial intelligence, and animals. I draw your attention to the aspect of Greimasian semantics which distinguishes our study of images from all others. Underneath the meanings are values. One can wonder if this conception affects at a higher level the posture of the researcher. Do the objects of our analysis solicit us? Do they transform our ways of thinking, our behavior? My generation in Italy, in the footsteps of Fabri, of Gianfranco Marrone, and Isabella Pezzini, tries to discover values and passion in the text, in discourses and practices, but knows that there is also a being passionate in researching. This issue, this question of values and balances is very important for me, and this is a great strength of I think of the School of Paris. Second strength of the School of Paris is that Greimas not only suggested a series of tools and categories, topological, eidetic, chromatic, but indicated a trajectory a path of the analysis. In his famous article of 1984, you mentioned a lot. So from the frame, Maria Giulia said that, from the frame that separate what is inside and what is outside the image, the noise, as Costa said, rightly to the symbolic correlation between contrasts of the expression plane and contrast of the content plane. So Greimas suggested a way, not only tools, but a way to do the analysis. Obviously, we can follow his suggestion, his consideration. Add during the years, we developed a lot his method, but I just want to outline that another step is that we have got a method also in the way of modus operandi. Reading the book, to conclude, I was also interested in your definition of the semiotic systems to be included in a semiotic of visual images, always Lagopoulos and Boklund-Lagopoulou. They write, they should be among the systems, so semiotic systems that belong to semiotics of visual images should be among the system the Hemsley calls connotative semiotics, and thus spontaneous cultural communication systems. Second, they write, they should be visual, that is addressed to the eye. Third, they should be structured by geometry and concern shape, size, relative position of figures, and the properties of space. So a commentary about this. Analogical and digital images are the product of sensomotricity. Maria Giulia insists a lot on that. At the beginning of the 2000s, we chose to move in Italy and in France too, from a visual semiotic to a semiotic of the visible. Fontanille took a decision like this and suggested that we had to go forward. The idea that what we perceive arrive exclusively by one of the channels of the five senses, by the sense of sight. Images imply polysensoriality and takes over heterogeneous and mixed syntaxes, such as those of smell, of touch, of hearing. So I would like to discuss with you these points. To conclude very briefly about there's a problem with visualists, with visual culture, Bem and Mitchell, because of their obstinacy in separating verbal and visual against all evidence. Because if we see all the images around us, text, images in arts, in advertising, in the scientific domain, are very often verbo-visual. So writing that is readable and pronounceable constantly intersect with figure. So this separation between language and visual is, according to me, a false problem. There's a marvelous publication by Meyer Shapiro, a great art historian, who shows that this intersection from medieval art up to today. So verbo-visual is the norm. The problem is when writing and figures are not together. Thank you.
Thanks indeed, Tiziana. Much to chew on there. Any of the authors wish to respond immediately?
I would like to thank Tiziana for speaking about values, because it's something that allows me to probably to speak a little bit about what we called the extra till now, and also to join the general discussion. I'd like to recall that when I began to study photography, I understood something that I could not understand probably studying paintings, the problem of status, in the sense that photography are never stable, are never only artistic, only scientific, only political, only advertisement, and so on. It helped me a lot to understand that the analysis, in the sense I was trained on, the idea that analysis is something intersubjective, and it's the first step for the interpretation. It was probably a false, it was probably a false a priori, I don't know. And I understood that the same image could be completely analyzed in a completely different way if we focus on it through the lens of the artistic status, through the lens of scientific status, the political status, and so on. It's a problem of values, because every domain that gives birth to a status value some values. For instance, for scientific domain, it could be experimentation. It's the same for art in a sense, but obviously there are different values that are in stake, and I think that the point of view of domains made of values can help us to disfocus, to blur a little bit this idea that there is only a analysis of one text. It's also to join the idea that the one same image in a status can be associated and can make image with other levels of relevance, other images or situation or spaces or I don't know, other levels of relevance. And I think that to conclude, I think that status really helps us to position the problem of iconicity, I don't want to say image, through different level of relevance we spoke before, the level of sign, text, objects, and situation. Thanks.
Good. Authors? Any more comments? Rhea? You're muted.
Oh, sorry, technology. Do excuse me. About the question of heterogeneity and of the fact that the heterogeneity is the norm of the verbal visual, and yes, indeed, is the norm, but the question is a methodological one. I'm coming from philosophy, Derrida, and this kind of stuff. So yes, writing, why I argue for the usefulness of the method of actually distinguishing them. That's the issue. I do believe that exactly, yes, writing is also pictorial, but not only. And the fact that it does have, it is a different kind of code to start with, is crucial for understanding it. And then you add, so when I analyze, because I work with cinema, which is so it includes a kind of multimodality inside its first, so there's a whole discussion, I don't want to enter here, of whether this this heterogeneity happens in the text of that is the film, and or whether it is already in the semiotic system. I would probably argue that it is already in the semiotic system, which would kind of complicate the question of modality. But I do insist that it is important to separate methodologically so as to see how they function differently. So yes, a writing in red, that it is big one, is an image, and it is important that it is in red, and etc. And it might be, but the fact that you read it in a different way, it cannot be subtracted. And let's take it politically the other way around. My fear, let's say, is that to read the images, we are less educated to do so. The images as images. We are very well educated to read words, but we do need to remember the pictorial aspect of the image. We do need to remember that it is important, questions like composition, like the point of view, like this kind of stuff, which are not taught, we are not part of our culture. And by blurring the distinction between the different kinds of semiotization, we basically push away the ability to read images. That's my point there. And a very short point regarding the different statuses. Let me add what you all know, of course, about the different Jacobson functions, and the fact that obviously, so yes, a photograph, the same photograph may have different functions in the same way, as you very well know. The idea of how we read it differently in different contexts, I would venture to say that in that cases, we should probably discuss the initial context as meaningful, and then start discussing how the context becomes part of the text in every case, how this kind of dialogue, we don't have the time to do it here, but because I'm very much interested in what Maria said on that, and I discuss it a lot too, but I think that then we just draw our frame a little out of the initial frame, basically, because it is there, it is not a literal frame, but a philosophical frame. But, we discussed that elsewhere. Thank you.
Alexandros and Karin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Migliore. It was very interesting, and I think that we have many points in contact. But well, where I would like to insist is what Rhea just said. I think that we must be very strict in the definition of semiotic system. And I think that the semiotic system is defined by its level of expression. And manifestly, language and image have different levels of expression. Of course, I said that in a book, I can have the description of a wood. But this is direct visual. It is an indirect. It is a visual through another semiotic system, linguistic system. That the basic idea of the expression plane gives the orientation for the definition of the semiotic system. Now, there we have a debate with a Persian perspective. I mean, whatever is visual, like diagrams, belongs to the semiotics of the image. For Persians, yes. For another point of view, but I will not come into the subject now, no. So we have two kinds of images. On the one hand, that is the cultural images, which is very important, and then we have the metalinguistic images like the diagrams. And this for me is an important problem to solve if they go together or they belong to a different kind of. Okay.
If I can say something, Paul, sorry. Yes, sure. There are. We are in front of different kind of system of expressions, but the normality is that these different systems cooperate in texts that are very heterogeneous. So I don't contest the difference that is obvious, and sense lies in difference. I contest the a priori idea of opposition between linguistic and
Absolutely right.
Yes, of course, but yes, of course, and we start by being multimodal. Just we need it as a methodological useful tool, not to make it ontological.
Oh yes, in many books there is a collaboration and complementary.
There is one other thing that is useful to remember, which is that something that is a diagram, for example, is not necessarily without values. You can make something appear very, very significant by simply changing the scale, so that what is in fact a small difference becomes much larger visually. So the problem of value is not limited to art, for heaven's sake. It's everywhere.
But it's regarding the visual studies, not your position. The fact that they oppose linguistic and visual, not you. Okay.
Very true. And I'm liking the profusion of questions, but I'm wary of time. So I think at this stage, what we will do is we'll give the discussants the opportunity of summing up, and we'll start with Kostas and then go on to Tiziana. But if you could do it in Fontanille style with 2 sentences, that would be optimum.
Jacques had 3 propositions. There was a conjunction, I think. So he had 3, which is a good person number. I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to read the book, to give commentaries. It's really it was really a delight, but it really is a quite powerful book, and I think we can see from the conversation that we've had that there are many future directions to go from it. And so I encourage everybody on the call, if you haven't already read the book, to do so. And there's lots more things, I mean, specific thoughts I had on specific points that came up, but I'll defer those to a future conversation, which I hope I can have with all of you collectively, individually, in person, on Zoom, or on Teams in the future. So thank you. Thank you,
Kostas. Tiziana?
Well, yes, I'm very glad for this meeting, and I would like to launch a proposition about the constitution of a permanent laboratory of observation of what happens in the semiotics of images. If you agree, once we have we reached a milestone, because there is a great convergence. In fact, also for the interest in the study of images, I think we can collaborate also through the IESS, our association, and constitute, and Maria Giulia, if she agrees, a laboratory which implies the sharing of lectures, of publications, of reflections, of analysis, because I think that much remains to say. Also, for instance, there are research of semiotics of the cinema in Italy that are I'm not a specialist of cinema, but I know very fine analysis that we can share. And so I think, and also in other fields about images. So why not? I think that Jacques could agree about this. Our association is open to initiative, and I think that this afternoon it was a very great occasion of discussion, and we can continue.
Excellent. Now, we can never sum up. This is an open discussion, open in the sense of being open almost eternally. But we've already done thanks at the beginning. We thank the authors. We thank Maria Giulia for energy in bringing this together. I would like to thank again the discussants for being both critical, provocative, but above all collegial. You don't get that on social media. Okay, so this is very much a departure from the demotic mode, and long live that kind of departure. But above all, I would like to thank the 40 or 50 people who were on this call, because without you, there is
yes, 50.
Sorry,
Maria Giulia for her great involvement, because she's the president of our association, the ISD.
You know,
yes, I think that we'll have other discussions soon.
Presidents are 10 a penny. We've got a number of them on this call already, but yes, I agree very much. So thanks for your energy. But we will meet again in due course. This has been an extraordinarily edifying spectacle right across the board. I'm sorry that we went over time, but thanks everybody for attending, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you.
Many thanks to all.